Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Jeez, wow, I'm having difficulty getting the buttons to move when I press them and react. Okay, we're a couple seconds behind schedule, so that's going to create some editing problems. I went to, hit the old ding button on the soundboard, and next thing I know, up pops a dialog box asking me whether or not I wanted to delete soundboard, and I did not. I did not want to delete soundboard, so I needed to take a moment to pause and make sure that I answered that I did not want to delete it and I should instead use it. I don't really know where I got that idea, but there you go. And then I had to fight with the mute button a little bit too. All right, well, okay, something. We're ready to go. We're not really ready to go. That's I think plain and obvious, but we have to, because we have committed to this schedule of 9 a.m. starting of shows, and I would like to have instead $100 million and $100 million worth of infrastructure like that other guy, Howard Stern, who will be interviewing Kamala Harris today, to just go on at will, and when I go, I go. But on the other hand, I could probably do that whole infrastructure for a lot less. Like, I just don't turn on the sound or the microphone when it's time to launch the show, and I just turn it on later, and everybody waits for me. Okay. Well, that should be an exciting development later on. It happens, again, at 1 p.m. Eastern. I don't know why I'm promoting it so much, but I guess I'm excited about the chance to listen to it if I want to, even though I probably won't. I don't know. I'll listen to the rerun at some point, but again, well, I'm a fan, but I don't really need to hear political interviews. Like watching debates, I kind of know what's going to happen and what's going to be said, and I can probably even anticipate the answers to whatever questions. It might be surprising to hear what kind of questions he asks, and it'll be an interesting and refreshing type of interview versus, say, the 60 Minutes interview, which I guess was aired last night. That one I definitely didn't watch. And I know that because it already happened. And I could probably go online and watch it, and I haven't bothered to do that. Instead, we have Reaction. I just, I didn't even have to wait to wake up to Reaction. There was Reaction instantaneously online. And apparently the set of questions and responses that caught everyone's eye have to do with having been asked dumb questions that were, I guess, aimed at getting Kamala Harris cornering her into saying, everybody in America is racist and I hate them. And what was weird was she didn't say that, even though they made it obvious that was what they meant for her to say. I guess the setup was, if Trump is running around saying all of these horribly racist things, and yet he's got the race tied, and millions and millions, tens of millions of Americans are all set to vote for him regardless, then what does that mean? Why won't you come out now and say that everybody who votes for him is racist and, jeopardize everything? And she, I guess, declined to do that. And so I guess that's the big news about the 60 Minutes interview, at least online. That's kind of what's being discussed. I don't know. I guess there's another New York Times article allegedly talking to undecided voters, in which it turns out that one of the undecided voters appears to be very decided online, although really, honestly, the comments that they gave about how undecided they are make it pretty clear that they've kind of decided too. So there's one of those two. Everybody's up in arms about that one. Let me, where can I put that one aside so that I can come back to the New York Times thing, and instead go to, do we want to handle it this way? The CNN's 5 takeaways from Kamala Harris's one-on-one interview with 60 Minutes. Do we care about what CNN has to say about that? Eric Bradner, Priscilla Alvarez, and Ebony Davis get the byline for the piece. There's, I guess, some video clips of the thing here available for us to see. But in writing, we learn the following. And, let's make sure that I'm up to speed on all of the incoming social media posts, etc. And, all right, let's see. Can we get all this done? Yes. Okay, back to CNN. There are 5 takeaways. Not 6, not 4. There are 5, and these are what they are. And I always wonder about whether, do they write, sometimes these things, I imagine it happens different ways for different circumstances. Do you write it and then say, well, these are the things that I think people ought to take away from it. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And tell the headline writer there are 5 of them, or does the editor say, give me the top 5 things that are takeaways? And if there's really only 3, they have to find a way to make 5, or do they say, but I have 6 and I have to eliminate 1? I'm not certain how it works. Anyway, look, here's an ad that will tell us how to hack life here, by the way. Seniors, that is elderly folks like us, seniors can now fly business class for and I imagine this is going to say, if I click on it, price of coach. And here is an elderly 20-something-year-old woman in a little black dress. I don't know what, like sitting on the drink cart, maybe. It's the picture is cropped. She's in the middle of a couple of rows of, I guess, first class or business class airline seats, sitting there, smiling at the camera, something, seniors. And I guess she did her job. I was supposed to look over there and pay attention to the ad, even though it seems a little unlikely. She's not a senior. What are you talking about? Plus, she's not even sitting in any of the business class seats, so I don't know what's going on. I've been distracted. 5 takeaways, ladies and gentlemen, from the 60 Minutes interview. I've already been taken away from the 60 Minutes interview. I'm not interested, but here we are. Vice President Kamala Harris faced tough questions. And as we know, we decided this yesterday with Greg that the only kind of valid, probative interview there is one with tough questions, hostile questioning, aggressive questioning, hard-hitting interviews. Even though, as it turns out, the most revealing and most interesting ones are the ones that simply, access information about the candidate and maybe about policy just conversationally. But you can't have that, or else the journalists aren't journalists, right? So, Vice President Kamala Harris faced tough questions. I missed the pronunciation on that one, yes. About how she'd pay for her economic plans. Oh, I can't believe they asked her, how would you pay for that? What a probing question. That is very difficult. The answer is, I am not sure. That would be up to Congress. Now, I would have several proposals about how to pay for that. I'd send them to Congress. I don't know whether they would be accepted or not. Very, very frequently, a president's funding mechanism for a proposed program is changed entirely. Sometimes just tweaked, but there's this whole process whereby the budget and the pay-fors are actually written by Congress and not by me. So it's hard to say. But I would propose that we pay for it with billions of dollars in tariffs. China will pay for the whole thing. That was one guy's answer. What else? Another takeaway, whether Democrats were too slow to enact border security measures. Let's say no to that one. How she'd confront Russia over its war in Ukraine. Stop that. And more in a wide-ranging 60 Minutes interview that aired on Monday. I don't know if they took all 60 minutes, but anyway. The Democratic presidential nominee's sit-down with CBS comes amid a media blitz that is also putting Harris in front of friendlier interviewers because those guys suck, with more targeted audiences. Her interview with Alex Cooper, host of the popular Call Her Daddy podcast, went live on Sunday. On Tuesday, she'll visit ABC's The View, sit down with Howard Stern, and appear on CBS's The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And then on Wednesday, she's set to participate in a Univision town hall. Univision, to Americans like you and me who pretend we don't know how to pronounce things in Spanish. With no more debates between Harris and former President Donald Trump currently scheduled, this slate of interviews could present the best opportunities for surprising and news-making moments in the final 4-week sprint to Election Day. It's nice of them to mention that. CNN is a news-gathering organization, and I'm surprised that they're willing to admit, actually what she's doing could present the best opportunity for surprising and news-making moments. Because usually they say the only way to make news or have any surprise moments is with us doing hard-hitting interviews with questions like, did you see the Trump thing? What do you think of that? That was awesome. Right? Here are 5 takeaways from Harris's sit-down in 60 Minutes. Harris says Congress must act on border security. Yeah, well, wow, what a surprise. I'm so glad I tuned in to find out that in order to make law, Congress must act. Now, you can have policy from the White House level, and I think you can do some things with executive orders, but what should be our law? Well, that's Congress. Harris maintained migration is a longstanding problem when asked about President Joe Biden's administration's approach to immigration policies and refused to answer whether officials should have cracked down sooner. From the outset, the Biden administration faced record migration in the Western Hemisphere, which was hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. Over the last 3 years, U.S. officials grappled with migrant surges at the southern border. Asked why the administration didn't crack down earlier, Harris cited an immigration bill proposed by Congress in early 2021 and slammed Republicans for tanking a recent bipartisan border bill after Trump urged them to reject the measure. CBS correspondent Bill Whitaker asked, but there was an historic flood. And historic flood. Very good. That was grammatically correct. A historic flood of undocumented immigrants coming across the border for the first 3 years of your administration. As a matter of fact, arrivals quadrupled from the last year of President Trump. Was it a mistake to loosen the immigration policies as much as you did? It's a long-standing problem, and solutions are at hand. And from day one, literally, we have been offering solutions, Harris said. Pressed on the record number of crossings and whether more action should have been taken sooner, Harris refused to answer, focusing instead on a recent action that has resulted in a drastic drop in crossings and putting the onus on Congress to act. But wasn't it a mistake to not do it sooner? I mean, I don't know. Is it a mistake? What do you mean by mistake? If the mistake is I couldn't prevent you from asking this question, then yes. But if it's a mistake, like, what if we let the wrong person in? We don't know. Shouldn't we have let no one in? No, that would be a mistake. But I need for it not to be a mistake, and I need for the mistake to be yours. Well, then fine. Pressed on the record number of crossings, right? Yes, it's puts the onus on Congress to act. They, of course, set the law on these things. We need Congress to be able to actually fix the problem. And I mean, it's interesting. Is that refusing to answer the question? If you say, was it a mistake to do things this way? Well, it was a mistake that was kind of forced on us, if it was a mistake at all, handed to us by a Congress that literally refused to set policy. We asked them, what should the policy be? And every time somebody came up with a policy, Republicans blocked it, because if they didn't, then people would be able to say, didn't you have a policy? Oh, yeah, that's right. You had a policy. Wasn't it a mistake for you to force the other people to shut up sooner? Yeah, that was a mistake too. But, this is what they need out of the interview, which is why you don't do these interviews all that often. No one-on-one meeting with Putin is the second takeaway. Harris said she would not meet bilaterally with Putin to negotiate a solution to the end of the war. Ukraine must have a say in the future of Ukraine. That is to say, no bilateral settling the fate of Ukraine by meeting between the U.S. and Russia. Harris said there will be no success in ending a war without Ukraine and the UN Charter participating in what that success looks like. The vice president avoided answering whether she would support the effort to expand the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, to include Ukraine, saying she would deal with it if and when it arrives at that point. In other words, will you cause now, right here on our air, because it would be very exciting, it would generate news and it would be an exclusive, will you create an international crisis immediately, please, while you are not president? And the answer is no. I will not create an international incident. I don't know how exactly this is going to shake out as between Ukraine and Russia, and I decline to conduct this sensitive negotiation by blurting out answers in a television interview. Harris, I'm writing here. You hear my writing sound? Declined to answer. Okay. those are all issues that we'll deal with if and when it arrives at that point. Right now, we're supporting Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russia's unprovoked aggression. So there you go. There's more on that one. The other takeaways, though, because this stuff is such, whatever, nonsense. Harris and Cheney's alliance on display. The interview at one point featured Harris together in, is it Ripon, Wisconsin? R-I-P-O-N, Wisconsinites. Sorry about that. Claimed to be the birthplace of the Republican Party, which I guess means I should know it, along with former Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney. Cheney, of course, ousted in a primary last year over her role in the House's investigation into Trump supporters on January 6, 2021, and their attack on the U.S. Capitol. And Cheney endorsed Harris, spoke at a rally in a key swing state last week. I hope that if you had said to me 4 years ago, our Constitution is going to be under threat and it's going to be crucial for the parties to come together and support Vice President Harris because she'll defend the rule of law, Cheney, I guess, says, I know I would have said, that's exactly what I'll do. Cheney told CBS, asked if she imagined campaigning alongside Cheney 4 years ago. Harris responded warmly, that'd be great. Harris said as both her and Cheney laughed. She's really diplomatic, Cheney joked. Which is why she wouldn't tell you a stupid answer to a stupid question about what exactly are you going to do about Ukraine and NATO? Work it out for us right here and now and on the air. Walls said Harris told him to be more careful with his words. Okay, let's see. He acknowledged making false claims about his military record. Wow, false? Come on. And about being in Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square unrest. But he said those moments were expressing emotion, telling a story, getting a date wrong, as opposed to being a pathological liar like Donald Trump. Okay, I can accept that. Let's see. Harris slams Trump's decision to drop out of a 60 Minutes interview. That's the fifth takeaway? All right. Well, so there you are. The takeaway is CNN's arbitrary list of takeaways from a kind of dumb interview are kind of dumb. I mean, maybe there was some value in it. Greg will be back tomorrow. Let Greg tell you if he watched the thing. I find nothing revealing, certainly, from CNN's review of what was supposed to be revealing from the interview. And that's, of no surprise to you or me. All right, let's see. I got to make a note to find. It's funny, all the action on people complaining about that one particular exchange between Harris and I don't remember who that was interviewing her. I haven't watched 60 Minutes in a million years. But that one interaction. Why won't you just say that the vast majority of American voters, Republican voters, are racist? And, she didn't want to do it because it didn't seem smart, so she didn't do it. And now the write-up is, hey, she wouldn't do it. That's so remarkable. Okay, let's see. I don't know how come this was now suddenly so hard to find. I guess people have moved on from it after complaining for the first, 2 or 3 hours of the day. Okay, well, we'll see if I can't find it later on and move on to the things that I did find and put aside. There's news from the Washington Post today, sort of news. One of those stories that I guess I'm glad they're printing it. It's news, about 95% of which we knew, and we surmised the other 5%. And now what we have is a report from Sheldon Whitehouse that I guess, it's a unilateral report, so I guess we have to say it purports to essentially confirm that 5% of the story that we were surmising. But it's, I think, important to read. One, to stay up with the news. Two, or what passes for news. That's important to know what everybody else is learning for the first time. And to remind everybody, as Greg always says, that adults learn by repetition. There are millions of people for whom the basic premise of this article is news somehow. Good, fine. So now they'll absorb it and take it away. And it's important to read it in light of other items of genuine news which people are still just waking up to, that the Supreme Court of the United States has immunized a sitting president from criminal prosecution over anything, even when they're out of office, over anything, no matter how illegal, essentially, that anything might have been, if they are discussing that illegality and plotting with members of the Department of Justice. You cannot be criminally charged for trying to manipulate and weaponize the Department of Justice against your political enemies because they're part of your administration. And the president needs to be able to, as a core function, needs to be able to tell, let's say the FBI, to clear their friends of wrongdoing and arrest your enemies. What's the latest on that? It is the FBI probe of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, having been, as it says here in the headline, constrained by the Trump White House. A report finds, a Democratic senator's report finds new evidence of the White House controlling an FBI investigation into sexual assault claims against the Supreme Court nominee. I can't believe it, except for all of the time that I have spent to date believing it. But other than that, let's add what Beth Reinhard has written up here just today on Tuesday. Did I even give everybody the date? Do you know what day it is? I mean, this is an important part of a news program. It's October 8th, 2024. I think I skipped that part because I was so flustered. None of the buttons were working. And I don't know. Now, OCD compels me to go back and tell you what the date is. In September of 2018, which isn't today's date, as allegations of sexual misconduct against Brett M. Kavanaugh, thank you, thank God we were reminded of his middle initial, Brett M. Kavanaugh threatened his confirmation to the Supreme Court, President Donald Trump vowed, and you know what that's worth, that the FBI would have, quote, free reign. I don't think he actually ever spoke those words aloud, but who knows, maybe. Free reign to vet the claims. Trump said the FBI was talking to everybody and added on social media, I want them to interview whoever they deem appropriate at their discretion. Just because this sort of stuff is crucial to making up your mind about who you're going to be voting for president. Whomever. Okay. I'm voting for the party that, scolds people about that. The president's comments came as a surprise to the FBI, which I really, really doubt that was a surprise. It's really amazing. The FBI apparently staffed by 6-year-old children who can't believe it. The president is telling me one thing privately and another thing publicly. What do I do? You do what he's telling you privately. The Supreme Court actually had to step in and let everybody know. Not only do you do what he's telling you privately, but don't worry about it. At least he can't be prosecuted for it. And if it's Trump, maybe, if you give him $1 million, he'll pardon you. The president's comments allegedly, purportedly, came as a surprise to the FBI, according to a new report from a Democratic senator, based on previously undisclosed correspondence between the agency and the White House. FBI officials directed to conduct a very limited inquiry in a week's time, which this much I know we knew contemporaneously. They said 1 week to conduct the investigation. Everybody said, why is there a time limit? Why would that be? And that was arbitrary, and of course it was. Well, I just want this thing over with quickly so that we can vote while there's still momentum, partisan momentum for confirming the guy. That's why the 1 week time limit. But FBI officials directed to conduct this very limited inquiry in a week requested, quote, additional guidance from the White House, citing the public remarks by Trump and other officials describing a freewheeling investigation. But the White House never authorized the agency to independently probe the sexual misconduct allegations, which Kavanaugh staunchly denied. The report, which was produced, confusingly enough, because it's about the White House directing the investigation, the report was produced by I was about to say doctor, but by Democratic and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. I don't know what. Doctor and Senator. He told me I could call him either one. If I was Donald Trump, that's how I would have handled that slip. Was produced by Doctor and Senator. I like to call him Doctor. Sheldon Whitehouse. He's got a Juris Doctorate degree. So I call him doctor. A Judiciary Committee member and a leading critic of the Kavanaugh confirmation, and provided to the Washington Post ahead of a public release on Tuesday, now you can read it too, provides additional evidence of the tight control exercised by the White House, over the FBI investigation, despite Trump's claims to the contrary. I cannot believe it. Contrary to the claims of Donald Trump. That is bizarre. The report found that the messages to the FBI tip line regarding Kavanaugh were forwarded directly to the White House and never probed, and that the FBI had no written protocols for the supplemental background investigation ordered by the White House. Now you might think, what written protocols do you need? You were told explicitly in public by the President of the United States that you should interview whomever you needed to do to uncover the real live truth, even though you really weren't. But here we get into process and procedure a little bit. How does the FBI ever conduct any of these investigations? They do so at the request of a certain agency, and in this case the agency is the White House, and they do exactly what they're asked. They're literalists. It's like my oldest son, the editor of this show. As a matter of fact, yes, we're talking about you. You hear it now. You do things, you're pretty exacting. Now, to you, that's following directions, right? And it is. But this is actually a widespread thing, I think, among, you're a Generation Z type person. Look, if you want me to do this, ask me to do that. Well, you're supposed to intuit from my request that you should take the initiative and go further with this thing. And no. If you want me to take the initiative, you should write down the instruction, take the initiative. But then you're not taking the initiative. If you want the initiative taken, ask me to take the initiative. So a little bit of an internal contradiction there. FBI had that problem. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I did find, finally, that one thing that we were looking for before. Oh, yes, right, the clip of the report of the discussion between Kamala Harris and Bill Whitaker of 60 Minutes, so that I can at least share that written quote. Though, apparently everybody in the United States shared it already and knows. It just, I couldn't find it, and that was a source of embarrassment. Now I found it. All right, back to where we were, reading about the FBI's cover-up of the investigation, or the non-investigation, or the White House's cover-up of the FBI's non-investigation into Brett Kavanaugh. And as I was saying, I guess conducted by literalists over there at the FBI, and I mentioned that we have such a literalist in the House, and that it seems to be something of a Gen Z thing, but really only on one specific issue. I don't mean to malign all Gen Z by any means, just specifically the one heading the show. And I'm not maligning you. I'm saying I think it's actually quite quite admirable, and it helps make you very predictable, and we know exactly how to manage certain things. If you've got a millennial or Gen Z person, some millennials, late millennials exhibit this trait as well. I guess everybody from every generation does. So it's ridiculous to try to assign it to a generation. It only comes up generationally in this context. I know this is an aside. This is like being at a Trump rally. I'm doing the weave, everybody. But the most famous example, and I think one you might recognize from dealing with people in your workplace, if you are, managing people or working at a certain level and you run into this, we need everybody, or everybody is encouraged to come to the optional, either if you're remote and transitioning back into the office, optional work in the office days. It's nice to get everybody together and see each other face to face, or coming to the after work happy hour, or picnic, the annual picnic for the company or whatever. It's optional, right? And then the bosses usually wink at the people and say, it's optional, but it makes a difference whether you're there or not. Right? It shows team spirit, essentially. If you come to the picnic or the happy hour or into the optional work in the office day, and there are employees of every generation who then don't go, and then they find themselves in the annual review, and the boss or HR or whoever says, well, maybe you could help yourself a lot by showing up to events like that. Well, you said it was optional. Well, it's optional, but I notice whether you're there or not. Well, then it's not optional. It's mandatory. You should just say it's mandatory. Well, I don't. It's not mandatory. It is optional. Well, then if you want me to be there, just say it's mandatory and I'll be there. I'll do anything you ask. But if you tell me it's optional and I opt not to go, you can't come back and complain to me that it was optional, but I opted not to go. Then it's optional. What's optional is you should opt not to mention it. If you want it to be mandatory, be mandatory. Well, no, it's not that it's mandatory, but I want you to want to be there. Well, tough. You're either going to have to make it mandatory. You see what I mean? But that and other literalist stuff, I need you to compile a report on whether or not Kavanaugh did these things. Well, how do you want me to conduct the investigation? I don't want you to conduct the investigation. Don't do it. Well, and if you don't tell me, though, I can't do anything. Apparently, that's the procedure over at the FBI. To bring it back to the story we were telling you about, the report, as we said, found that messages to the FBI tip line regarding Kavanaugh were forwarded directly to the White House and never probed, and that the FBI has no written protocols for the supplemental background investigation ordered by the White House. It notes that the FBI was instructed by the White House, the report notes this, instructed by the White House to talk to 10 potential witnesses, and I don't know whether that was just, that's how many we have, or I'll give you a week, talk to, 10 witnesses. You give me 5 takeaways from 10 witnesses, and was not given the leeway to pursue corroborating evidence. This is the important thing here for just a second. So was not given the leeway to pursue corroborating evidence, the absence of which was cited by senators as they narrowly voted to confirm Kavanaugh. I have to vote to confirm him because there's no corroborating evidence for the claims against him. And there isn't corroborating evidence because the FBI was not allowed to look for or pursue corroborating evidence. You got to talk to 10 witnesses. If they give you corroborating evidence or send you in the right direction of corroborating evidence, if they send you in the right direction, don't go in that direction. If they give you corroborating evidence, don't write it down. Now, there's no corroborating evidence, and Republican senators, and I guess, I don't know, did any Democrats vote for him? They're able to just say, bury my head in the sand. I didn't see any corroborating evidence, so my hands were tied. The president isn't entitled to his nominees, unless he's a Democrat. Anyway, so there you are. When the Senate narrowly voted to confirm him, marking a major triumph for the conservative movement and locking in a right-leaning majority that would later overturn the constitutional right to abortion, in case that's of interest to you. Trump ordered the additional inquiry following the nationally televised testimony by Christine Blasey Ford that Kavanaugh had, groped her and tried to take off her clothes more than 3 decades earlier when they were in a high school together and at a party in suburban Maryland. Another accuser, Deborah Ramirez, I guess they weren't actually, were they not at the same, they were at like brother and sister institutions, but not the same high school. But anyway, they were at the same party together in suburban Maryland. Another accuser, Deborah Ramirez, had come forward in a New Yorker story saying Kavanaugh had, hey, good morning, everybody. Well, do you remember what he did? Do I have to tell you? He had shoved, we'll say, well, I mean, it's got a medical term, but a certain part of his anatomy that isn't really morning discussion, but it's in the newspaper, shoved his penis into her face. Just a Supreme Court justice shoving penises into faces during a dorm party when they were at Yale University in the early 1980s. And, it was a very penis-shoving time, the 1980s. He was a product of his times. Well, the congressional report published today confirms what we long suspected. The FBI supplemental investigation of then-nominee Brett M. Kavanaugh was, in fact, a sham effort directed by the Trump White House to silence brave victims and other witnesses who came forward and to hide the truth, said Blasey Ford's lawyers, Deborah Katz and Lisa Banks. An attorney for Ramirez, John Clune, said of the report, "It's really disappointing since our client was so candid about something that was a pretty awful experience." Yeah, I didn't even like talking about it 35 years later or whatever it is, and I wasn't even there. Kavanaugh did not respond to a request for comment sent to the Supreme Court on Monday. Trump campaign spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said Kavanaugh, quote, was unfairly slandered and smeared with lies, unquote. Some of the limits placed by the Trump White House on the inquiry were widely reported at the time. See, I knew that this was the case. It felt that way, didn't it? The FBI did not question Kavanaugh or Blasey Ford about the allegations. That seems like, basic building blocks kind of a thing for an investigation, but what the hell? Nor did the FBI interview dozens of people whose names were provided by lawyers for Blasey Ford and Ramirez who said they could have offered corroborating evidence because they weren't allowed to look for corroborating evidence. And they were told, here's a list of 10 witnesses you can talk to, nobody else. It was also clear at the time that the FBI was not conducting a criminal investigation in which it could have or would have had broad authority. In a criminal investigation, you go where the facts lead you. In a special investigation directed by the White House, you go where the White House tells you. And if they say, don't actually look at anything, you won't. The FBI declined to comment on the report, but explained in a statement how it responds to requests from the White House to conduct background investigations. That's what this was, right? A special one, and a supplemental one, but a background investigation requested by the White House. And here's how it works. The FBI follows a long-standing established process through which the scope of the investigation is limited to what is requested. It's a whole FBI full of Gen Z literalists. By the book. Everything's by the book. And you expect it to be by the book. That's how you keep things, ordinarily how you keep things fair. But it's abusable, and it sounds like Trump abused it. They follow a long-standing established process through which the scope of the investigation is limited to what is requested. The statement said, the FBI does not have the independent authority to expand the scope of a supplemental background investigation outside the requesting agency's parameters. Again, it's not a criminal investigation, so it can't do it on its own. And they answer the very basic questions and the very basic charge that they're handed by the requesting agency. In this case, it's the White House, and that's it. It's not an independent counsel. It's not a special counsel investigation. It's not a criminal investigation. Please ask these questions of these people, and that's it. In an interview, White House, not the White House, but the senator, the doctor/senator, said the review of the FBI probe took 6 years because of resistance from both the Trump and Biden administrations to providing correspondence with the FBI, access to FBI officials, and answers to questions about the investigation. I know it's probably disappointing to you to find out that the Biden administration did the same thing, and the only real explanation for it is it's institutional. The institution of the White House and the office of the presidency jealously guarding their prerogatives to keep dealings with the DOJ and its subsidiary organizations like the FBI out of the public eye, especially now that they are also immunized from any criminal charges that might stem from wrongdoing with them as collaborators. But it's long been the position of the White House, no matter who's occupying it, that you jealously and maximally guard your prerogatives and give up nothing, set no precedents, guard the power of the institution. Unfortunately, that sometimes means when you hand it over to maniac idiots like Donald Trump, they will abuse those procedures and those assumptions that go with them. Not that much you can do about that, really, except throw everything out the window when someone like Donald Trump comes along, which, might actually be the option you have to exercise. So, right, Sheldon Whitehouse, the doctor senator, said that for that reason, that's why this whole probe took 6 years, until 2021. The only information Democratic senators said they were able to obtain about the procedures for that supplemental background investigation was a publicly accessible YouTube video explaining how the FBI tip line works. Wow, that's it, huh? Assurances that everything was being done by the book, and I guess it was. The book just said don't do anything. Everything was being done by the book and according to standard FBI procedures, omitted the fact that for supplemental background investigations, there is no book and there are no procedures, White House said. You simply do what the White House tells you. That's really the big takeaway here is, well, we did a supplemental background investigation as requested by the White House. Okay, well, what does that mean? And what did the White House request? And what are the parameters of that request? Well, one, we can't tell you. But 6 years later, you found out. And the answer is, when the White House asks for a supplemental background investigation like this, we do whatever the White House asks us to do, no more, no less. And if they say, essentially, you're not, I guess what they didn't do is say, give me a report that clears him no matter what you find out. They didn't apparently do that, but they basically said, here are the parameters under which you're allowed to operate, and knowing that would come out with this conclusion. You can't talk to anybody. You can't pursue any corroborating evidence. You can't talk to the victim. You can't talk to the accuser and victim. You can't talk to the judge about it either. Here's a list of 10 people you can talk to who won't tell you anything. And if they give you the names or numbers of people who can corroborate what they say, too bad. Now write me a report. Well, there's going to be a report restating what was said and how there's no corroborating evidence. And not why there's no corroborating evidence, just the fact that there is no corroborating evidence. You're not authorized to tell anybody why there's no corroborating evidence. They should understand why there's no corroborating evidence. But it will take 6 years for them to find the document that actually establishes the why of it. But by that time, he will already have overturned Roe versus Wade. So, whatever. Who cares at that point? The report notes that there was no dedicated tip line set up for the Kavanaugh inquiry. Now, you and I recall, oh, yes, there was. There was a tip line, and there was like 10,000 calls to it. And, yes, they covered everything up, and they never investigated any of the leads that were given there. But there was a tip line, right? Well, yeah, there was. But notice the language. No dedicated tip line. Members of the public apparently were directed to a pre-existing portal called the National Threat Operations Center. So in other words, the whole see something, say something line, dogma that we were taught in the global war on terror, et cetera, et cetera. See something, say something. Who would you say it to? I guess the FBI. How would you do it? You call the National Threat Operations Center. Same telephone line that you would call to say, I saw somebody leave a backpack next to the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee on January 6th, and it looked like Marjorie Taylor Greene, but, it didn't. But, we say it did. And the bomber walked funny, and I don't know, I think she walks funny, so therefore, yada, yada. I don't know. I've never really been convinced by that one, but I'm open to the possibility. How about that? I'm open to hearing more rumors and then saying, no, that really isn't true. But I love hearing the rumors anyway, because she's a terrible person. Anyway, The point is, you call the same line, the same place you would call with the see something, say something report. Or I heard there's a guy who's president of the United States who's talking to Vladimir Putin in secret and allowing Putin to direct our foreign policy. Oh, well, call this number. But it's the same number. Also, by the way, if you know anything about this nominee for the Supreme Court molesting women habitually, let's say. If that were the case, I don't know. You can call this number, same one. The FBI received more than 4,500 calls and electronic messages related to Kavanaugh and was directed to forward those tips to the White House without pursuing any possible leads, according to the report. Even when senators contacted the FBI directly, senators and doctors contacted the FBI directly with the names of people who claimed to have relevant information about Kavanaugh, because, I have information relevant to this investigation. FBI's answer is, no, you don't, because there's no information relevant to this investigation, because there's no investigation. We were asked to put together a report that said the following things, and your thing is not one of them. But there you go. If you called, or even if you're a senator calling and saying, I know somebody who has relevant information, FBI doesn't contact them. Interesting. What do you know? There was something in the last two paragraphs that I was just saying, this reminds me of another story which is in Pocket, and I've already forgotten what I'm reminded of, but let's see. This is, I'm going to review these two paragraphs and see if I can remember. Right. Assurances about everything being done by the book, standard FBI procedures, omitting the fact that for supplemental background investigations, there's no book, and you do. Oh, yes, right. Marker for myself. The Trump Bibles being purchased in Oklahoma. I know that's a weird connection, but if I get to it, I swear we'll make the bridge then. First, I'm going to read the rest of this. The report did describe in the end, finally, how 2 days before voting on Kavanaugh, senators were given about an hour to review more than 1,600 pages of material collected by the FBI. And you know that that's not enough time. We got a special counsel filing the other day. It took us 7 hours almost to read through 165 pages. So 10 times more pages means about 70 hours. And they had they were given 1 hour. I thought they were given a day. Sorry. 1 hour to review the 1,600 pages of material collected by the FBI. But not that it would matter, because they weren't collecting anything in the way of corroborating evidence anyway. They mostly saw raw information in the 1,600 pages from the tip line. But at least they got to see something from the tip line. Neither the FBI nor the White House explained whether the tips had been reviewed, White House said. So this is the tip line. It all went up to the White House for a decent burial. White House, the Dr. Senator, said, with no investigation whatsoever. So that's sort of interesting. Again, if you make the rules, you can get it's an invitation to determine the outcome. It is outcome determinative, to use the phrase that was part of the election integrity screaming in our discussions just a couple of days ago. So if you can determine the rules, you can determine the outcome. There is no investigation worth anything happening here, so go ahead and produce me one of those reports, and you say, sorry, there's just really nothing you can do with this information. Plus, you only get an hour to review it. These are a bunch of tips we got. Did you pursue them? Are they legit? I don't know. Did you pursue it? No. So you're telling me I can't really depend on this? I guess. I don't know. I'm not telling you anything. Okay, well, it's time to vote. What are you going to do? I don't know. There's nothing here. If you're a Democrat, you probably came away saying, I am unconvinced that this is helpful for Kavanaugh. This was obviously an engineered effort, and it tells me nothing, so I guess I'm just going to believe the accusations against them, because if they were disprovable, they would have disproved them, and they didn't do that. And if you're a Republican, you see what you want in it. There's no corroborating evidence. So that's the sort of thing that makes you sound like you're a smart and deliberative person when you say there's no corroborating evidence. There's no corroborating evidence because you forbade the inclusion of corroborating evidence. But if I don't say that part, it'll make it sound like I conducted an investigation. After all, there's a report here. You can't just produce a report with no investigation. You can now, of course. You just ask AI to do it. But here, they ask not AI, but the FBI to take care of the thing. I want you to listen to all of these calls, write down what they say, and then, I don't know, type it up and give me an hour to review it. Good investigation. Thanks. Good talk. All right. So I mentioned that there was a story that was linked, at least in my mind, to this, and there are a couple of other things we have to turn around and give some more updates on too. So some other related stories. Where is this one here? The story is that in Oklahoma, where they're a little bit crazy, and the Republican administration there does a lot of crazy, weird, and stupid things. One of the crazy, weird, stupid things is they installed I don't know how. Elected, appointed, don't know, doesn't really matter a great deal. The guy in charge of education statewide there in Oklahoma as a state secretary of education or something. We've talked about this guy before. He's a wacko, and I think he made our radar at some point for hiring libs of TikTok, hire Raychick, as a consultant of sorts on his education policy. Of course, her education policy idea is I would like to direct my fans to phone bomb threats into the schools because we want to keep the kids safe. So the safest thing to do is close the schools all the time for bomb threats. And the way I'll be able to generate those bomb threats is I will tell my crazies, oh my God, they're giving kids sex change operations in schools. You got to call and phone in a bomb threat so that they can't go to school anymore. Okay, great. That'll keep the kids safe. It's essentially what she's all about, and that's why he hired her to do this. Well, okay, he's done something else dumb and dangerous, and here it is. The Oklahoman reported it just the other day. Trump Bible. You remember those? That Donald Trump started selling Bibles. Not watches, not NFTs, not digital trading cards, not digital media, not steaks, not water, not vodka, not wine, not condos, not, what else is there that he's sold over the years? I don't know. Not a university education, nothing. Bibles. Well, yeah, okay, we all remember that. And the special edition of the Bible that says what he wants it to say, rather than, let's say, I don't know, God, if you believe that's the way that the Bible was crafted. The Trump Bible, apparently, is one of few, and when I say few, I mean one, is one of one that meet Walters's criteria for Oklahoma classrooms. Now, remember, this is in the Oklahoman. So for you say Walters's criteria. Who's Walters? Barbara Walters? Some other Walters? I can't think of any other Walters as a last name. Well, there is one. And Jennifer Palmer, Paul Monies, M-O-N-I-E-S, and Heather Warlick all know which one they're talking about. He's the guy in this photograph underneath the headline. Ryan Walters. Superintendent Ryan Walters isn't just talking about buying Bibles for schools, which is a thing that he's actually talking about, which usually by itself would be, scandalous and weird, except among people who say, why are we not praying in schools? And, it's like 50, 60 years since we answered that question, but they pretend still to be puzzled by it. But Ryan Walters is going to change all that. Bibles must be a part of the curriculum in the schools, and they have to be certain Bibles. You'll see how this story goes. Bids opened Monday for a contract to supply the State Department of Education with 55,000 Bibles. According to the bid documents, vendors must meet certain specifications, and that is not unusual for a procurement contract, but here are the specifications. First, the Bibles must be the King James Version. Now, King James has been dead for a long time. He's from the early 1600s, and so what we're talking about here is the one with weird, goofy, Bible-y language, where things, hath, doth, and, I don't know, willeth. A lot of extra THs in the King James Bible. Thou shalt not, that kind of stuff. That's the way God spoke, because God lived in the 16th century in England, and that's really the upshot of it. And not only that, the 17th century, which is the actual century in which I guess King James reigned, but never mind that. It begins with a 16, and we all like to think of that as the 16th century. It isn't. And we don't like to think of it that way. It's just a mistake that I made. Anyway, they got to be the King James Version. It must also, in this Bible, contain the Old and New Testaments, and that's nice of them to contain the Old Testament. And that way they could say, oh yes, right, you should absolutely be throwing rocks at whores. Otherwise, you just have the New Testament and you're supposed to feed the poor, and that's illegal in Oklahoma anyway, so they didn't want to just leave it at that. It must include copies of, this is where it begins to get weird, the Pledge of Allegiance, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, but only the Bill of Rights, and must be bound in leather or leather-like material, like latex and chains. Not bind me. This is not Ryan Walters asking to be bound. This is the book. So that will be probably just leather or leather-like material. Okay. So, a regular Bible, except King James Version, and it has the Pledge of Allegiance in it. Listen, there are no books in Johnny's room that meet this description, is what we're saying. What Bible has the Pledge of Allegiance in it, and the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, but nothing from Amendments 11 through 20, let's say 28, in a tip of the hat to Rosalyn MacGregor, about which we'll explain later. But yeah, that's not part of the Bible, and it doesn't go in there. But the Trump Bible, because it's a Trump thing and it's political at bottom, contains all this stuff. And what do you know? We've just written the parameters, just like they wrote the parameters of the investigation for Brett Kavanaugh. This is the bridge to be outcome determinative. So Walters has said, we're going to use state money to buy 55,000 Bibles. What good is it to me if the money goes to some schmuck in a church somewhere or to God directly? I want this money to go to Donald Trump. So we're going to write the requirements such that only Donald Trump's Bible can be purchased here. Besides which, everybody knows you got to have this stuff in your Bible, because otherwise no one will remember the Pledge of Allegiance. This is an apparent patriot. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Did you catch that before I faded out? The Trump Bibles are the only ones that meet the criteria set by Ryan Walters, the secretary, what did we call him, of education there in Oklahoma. Superintendent of schools statewide in Oklahoma. Okay, so hire Raychick as a consultant and using state money to buy 55,000 Bibles, which alone is a little bit of a weird thing. By the way, they could easily just have said 55,000 state employee hotel stays must conclude with the theft of the Gideon's Bible, and we can provide them to the kids at school for free. There are organizations that give out free Bibles, but he's going to buy the Bibles, and they have to all come from Trump, because it's important that they all contain all these other extraneous documents. And I was saying, who needs a written copy of the Pledge of Allegiance? What kind of patriot doesn't know this by heart? I mean, I suppose there are of course immigrants to the country, but they don't care about them, who, have to study the Pledge of Allegiance for their citizenship test. But for the most part, I would say most people probably, even the immigrants, probably just don't need the Pledge of Allegiance written down for them. But it does say under God in there ever since the 1950s and the Red Scare. Communists don't believe in God, so we'll put under God in our Pledge of Allegiance. And then if a communist tries to sneak into the country and say the Pledge of Allegiance to make it look like he's an American, he'll burst into flames like a vampire, splashed with holy water, and that's how we'll know. I don't know what the theory was, but there it is. So it's printed in the Bible now. So now you know it has to be true because it's in the Bible, as does everything in the U.S. Constitution except the parts we don't like, including Amendments 11 through 28. Anyway, so guess what? A salesperson at Mardell Christian and Education, which is, I don't know what, a source of Bibles, a bookstore, searched, and though they carry 2,900 different Bibles, because of how there's only one true one, you know how it goes, none fit the parameters, except for one. One Bible fits it perfectly. Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA Bible, endorsed by former President Donald Trump and commonly referred to as the Trump Bible, because Trump is famous, more famous than Lee Greenwood's. God Bless the USA Bible. That's the actual name of it. It's Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA Bible. I did not know that. I've learned something new. Commonly, though, referred to as the Trump Bible because that's who gets the money when these Bibles are sold. They cost $60 each online, with Trump receiving fees for his endorsement. So if I can just get the calculator out quickly, they are $60 a piece. They're buying 55,000 of them. That is a $3.3 million contract for Bibles. Just Bibles. So that's interesting, don't you think? Mardell doesn't carry the God Bless the USA Bible. They have 2,900 Bibles. The God Bless the USA Bible, not deemed important enough, significant enough for a Bible selling store that has 2,900 different Bibles in stock to carry. Nor do they carry any other Bible that could meet the specifications. There is one other Bible, the We the People Bible, which was also endorsed by Donald Trump, and it sells for $90. So you're kind of stuck either way. What was it? 90 times 5,500. I mean, the math, having done the $60 one, should be easy, but it isn't, and not for when you're on the radio. $4.95 million to fulfill the order that way. Or again, free Bibles from the Gideons. The RFP on its face seems fair. Not really. But with the additional scrutiny, we can see that there are very few Bibles on the market that would meet these criteria, and all of them have been endorsed by former President Donald Trump. Oklahoma Appleseed Center for Law and Justice Executive Director Colleen McCarty said. Former Oklahoma Attorney General Drew Edmondson said the request for proposals might violate state law, but not God's law, so we're going to be okay. It appears to me that this bid is anything but competitive, Edmondson said. It adds to the basic specifications other requirements that have nothing to do with the text. The special binding and inclusion of government documents will exclude almost all bidders. If the bid specs exclude most bidders unnecessarily, I would consider that a violation. Or I could consider that. It says I could consider that a violation. But I won't, because then there will be bomb threats to my house. And by the way, why do you need leather binding for this Bible? Because it feels traditional. You know, I mean, hardcover even would be fine. But paperback works just as well for Bible. But nope, this one has to have leather because that makes it official, and also I can exclude almost everybody else besides the Trump-endorsed Bibles. Okay, separation of church and state concerns aside, because why have any of those? By the way, any special irony to separation of church and state being based, presumably, in the First Amendment, which is, in fact, included in this Bible? This Bible instructs you. And remember, you're supposed to be obeying everything that's in the Bible. It's all true. The Bible says that you should not be buying these Bibles and putting them in schools. Oh well. Logic. Separation of church and state concerns aside, much less expensive Bibles are readily available. Paperback versions of the new King James Version, they didn't come up with a new King James, but the version is new, are available online for $2.99 each. How do you like that? By the way, so if we round that up to $3 and you need 55,000 of them, that is $165,000. So a $1 million savings to be had for that. And, there's a lot of, that could be $3 million in libs of TikTok's pocket Chaya, you should do something about this and make sure that it doesn't happen this way. You should get this money. Anyway, so that's, 5%, less than 5% of what the Trump-endorsed Bibles would cost. There are many free Bible apps, too. But, if those Bibles might have been written by AI. So you got to watch out for that. Though Walters has frequently said, that would be a good design. If it wasn't for the fact that it would destroy the environment, it would be interesting to ask AI to write a Bible, a new Bible for Oklahoma to use. Anyway, though Walters has frequently said he wants Bibles in every classroom, he has also clarified publicly that he wants them in classes where the Bible might apply to academic standards, such as history or literature. The request for 55,000 copies doesn't fit either scenario, as there are only 43,000 classroom teachers in the state, and many fewer teaching just history or literature. So, of course, they boost the sales. There's no real reason to have that many. The number's not based on anything. It's just something that he threw out there. I guess you could make the case for, a comparative religion class or even cultural literacy. Everybody in the United States kind of knows that most of the people in the country are either Christian or Jewish or, now at this point, Muslim, but screw them because something, Islamophobia, really. But everybody knows something, da-da-da-da. It's a big part of our cultural heritage. Maybe you want to study what it is that's driving all these people crazy. Sure. Why not? Anyway, if the Bibles cost $60 each, they did the math for us, and the state buys 55,000, that's $3.3 million. I'm glad they did the math. Walters, no extra things. What does this mean? On September 26, Walters asked for $3 million to purchase the Bibles for Oklahoma classrooms as part of his agency's fiscal year 2026 budget request to the Oklahoma State Legislature. Guess what? Any problems with education there in Oklahoma? We did the math. So did the Oklahoman. They just said it would cost $3.3 million. $0.3 million is $300,000. That's nothing to sneeze at. So, he wants 55,000 Bibles. That will cost $3.3 million. What is his budget request? $3 million. That's a lot, but he's already busted the budget. He's over by 10% right off the bat. So, okay, balanced budget amendment. God will strike you dead if you won't balance your budget. Ryan Walters didn't balance his budget. Rest in peace, Ryan Walters. Struck by lightning and killed by God. We have talked about ensuring that our history courses include the role of the Bible played throughout American history, Walters said. We've talked about the efforts of left-wing groups and the teachers' unions to drive the Bible out of school. I believe it's important for historical context for our kids to understand the role the Bible played. I would like to know the role the Bible played in making you incapable of doing mathematics, but I'm not certain I can make it work. Anyway, okay. What about never mind the efforts of left-wing groups to exclude the Bible. What about the efforts of you screwing up your budget so that you can't get the Bibles you want? Anyway, he said the request was in conjunction with $3 million the agency was already putting forth to provide Bibles in the classrooms. What? In a discussion with the board at the meeting, Walters said he wanted to issue an RFP and wanted the King James version of the Bible, because of how much he liked King James, I guess. We don't want extra things in there. Historical documents are fine, even though those are extra things. We don't want extra things, but these extra things are okay. If it's the King James version and the Constitution, the Magna Carta, things like that, there are also in statute that can be used in the classroom. That's fine, but we don't want commentary around the Bible because this is to serve as a historical reference document. Okay. Bidding open to fast-track Oklahoma classroom Bibles. That's the next section. Walters said finding a Bible vendor should go through the competitive bidding process because that would be the cleanest, easiest way to choose. The board did not discuss purchasing Bibles with the current budget year appropriation. However, the state issued a solicitation on Monday, and it's open for just 2 weeks. 2 weeks, very soon, short period of time. The Office of Management and Enterprise Services typically recommends at least 4 weeks, so that's problematic all by itself. Dan Isett, I-S-E-T-T, Walters' spokesman said their intention with the RFP is to get Bibles distributed to classrooms as quickly as possible. So why not an electronic Bible and an app? ISIT said the $3 million is coming from payroll savings. You're fired. We're getting a Bible. OSDE. Okay, I'm sure that's the Oklahoma State Department of Education, has realized significant personnel and administrative cost savings that can be directed toward this program. At least 130 people have resigned or been fired since Walters took office in 2023, the Oklahoman reports. So I guess the money comes from there. Trump has praised our efforts. That comes next. You know what? It's time for us to get out of this story at this point. It's actually pretty lengthy. We could finish it in time and everything, but I think we got everything we really needed out of this. They basically have created parameters, used the rules, just the way they did the rules for shaping the investigation into Brett Kavanaugh to make sure they got a report that said Brett Kavanaugh didn't do anything. They shaped the RFP such that the only thing Oklahoma can do now is give money to Trump. Why? Because they need Bibles, and Trump sells Bibles, so that's it. Why don't they give everybody a digital trading card from Trump Digital Media? I guess they could. That was part of our history as well. Kids need to know about the things that Donald Trump was selling. That's part of our cultural heritage now. So, there you go. All right, that's why I jumped to that, and that's why my mind went there when we were reading about the Brett Kavanaugh thing. Now, I mentioned that there were some other stories we have to check back in on, and there are a couple. Do you remember yesterday? Do you remember yesterday at all? Because one of the things that I said yesterday, we were reading about, what's his name? McCormick, I have to go back and find our article about him in the archives. The guy who is the U.S. Senate nominee, Republican Senate nominee in Pennsylvania, who went to Philly for the day and got himself thrown out of or banned from a cheesesteak restaurant, if you can call it a restaurant, cheesesteak shop, because he faked up an event there. They didn't want to have any political events there for whatever. There's plenty of political events at cheesesteak shops all over the place, and you hear about the Pats and Geno's are always the ones used for that. Somebody actually said Max's was better and you should go there if you wanted to look good, but Max's doesn't want, typically, generally speaking, didn't want political events there because they don't need the hassle. So knowing that, the campaign had a local Republican activist arrange for the event by saying it's going to be about autism awareness. And he said, okay, I can do autism awareness. In fact, I actually have a personal interest in that. So Dave McCormick, you can come on in and do the autism awareness event. But then it wasn't that. They started hanging up Trump signs and he gave a political stump speech. And the owner of the place said, yeah, well, okay, finish your event and then get out of here. Don't come back. Right? And then we learned from the Daily Beast and Philadelphia Inquirer's reporting about this, that this had all been arranged by one Sheila Armstrong, a local, Republican activist, and I don't know if she's like a local elected official or what, but she arranged for the event, and she did it under the auspices of her autism awareness group, and it struck us, haven't we heard about this before? Cooking for Autism, which, it should be, I guess, cooking in order to combat, or address autism, or combat the causes of autism if we know what they are, which we don't, but I'm sure she thinks she does. But, it's not for autism per se, like, hooray, autism, we'll cook in order to spread autism all over the place. No. Well, anyway, cooking for autism awareness. But that's too long. But it struck a chord with us, and I said, haven't we heard of that organization, or at least this person before? And I had to go back into the archives and look, and we have. And just to refresh your memory, that's what I thought I would do. Another older Philadelphia Inquirer story, I'm having a look at this through the pocket version. Can I scroll enough to find out if the date is right? No, of course not. The Philadelphia Inquirer, quite rightly, needs to be paid in order to get their reporting on this. unless you read it out of pocket, the faith-based leader for Philly's Moms for Liberty chapter is a registered sex offender. That's not Sheila Armstrong. It's someone else, but Sheila Armstrong, and I thought her organization, her Cooking for Autism, but maybe not. I didn't see it in my skim through this article. It's not mentioned here, but that's where this all came from. This was Philip Fisher Jr., a Republican ward leader and pastor who coordinates faith-based outreach for Philadelphia's Moms for Liberty chapter, of which Sheila Armstrong is either a part or in charge, helps run a mayoral town hall meeting. In this caption of this photo, he doesn't look like he's dressed for running a mayoral town hall meeting, but he's just doing the audio for it, so he's dressed down a bit. But Philip Fisher is the guy we're talking about here, and he is the registered sex offender, and he's the one working in conjunction with Moms for Liberty. Working with Moms for Liberty in Philly means working with Sheila Armstrong, and that's where the connection came from. Sheila Armstrong, another Republican ward leader who chairs the local Moms for Liberty chapter, according to this older article, said she was also surprised, I guess, that Fisher's a registered sex offender because he's been active in community outreach events with local and federal law enforcement, and she's expressed concern that children were sometimes part of that. She's from Moms for Liberty, or protecting children from sex predators, but instead they were, in fact, coordinating with sex offenders. So, Anyway, that's I guess why the name Sheila Armstrong rang a bell. That was from November 2023, that article. I don't know whether we read it contemporaneously or read it at some time after that, but there you go. I thought that was of some interest and, needed to be added to the background of the news roundup. So the other thing was, I had said that we were reporting on, what was it? The targeting of, I think, political opponents by the Trump administration, or not the last Trump administration, but I guess threatening to do this. Now I have to look back in the archives and see what it was. And I had said, Florida is doing something like this too. What was it? Yes, right. Trump allies threaten Deloitte contracts after employee shares Vance chats. You remember that story yesterday? If you didn't hear it yet, Washington Post had reported that somebody released copies of text chats that they had with J.D. Vance. They were personally friends, I guess, and were in contact. And back in 2020... when Vance was just sort of worming his way into position to try to run for something of influence, the Senate is what turned out to be back in 2022. But in 2020, while he was setting himself up for this thing, he was commenting freely on how much he thought Donald Trump was a horrible person and a horrible fit for the country and maybe America's Hitler, et cetera, et cetera. And this guy said, I have those comments. Those should be highly embarrassing because J.D. Vance is now Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate, and you know how things are supposed to go as between the candidates on the same ticket. And they're not like that, or at least they weren't back in 2020. Anyway, he released those texts to the press, and the immediate reaction from Republicans, not, oh my God, we got to get him out of here, that is to say Vance, he's anti-Trump, or anything like that. Instead, they said, well, who is the person that released these texts, and how can we get at them and ruin their lives? And the answer is, I heard he works for Deloitte, and Deloitte is a federal contractor. So federally elected Republicans will make it their business to say we should be reviewing the contracts that Deloitte has so that we can threaten them with termination of those contracts unless they terminate this employee. In other words, we want to use our information to use the power of the federal government, to the extent that we exercise any of it, to ruin the life of this person, which is an interesting approach to governance, let's say, and the sort of thing that drives people to desperation. As we keep noting, all of these threats that are leveled against political opponents through social media that result in bomb threats, death threats, rape threats to the people who speak out in opposition to Trump is eventually going to get someone killed, and everyone points that out, and chiefly they're worried about the targets of these efforts being the ones who were killed by over-enthusiastic, let's say, Trump supporters, that one of them would follow through on the death threats, bomb threats, rape threats, and end up hurting or killing these people. But it should be pointed out, we can't guarantee that it isn't Donald Trump or a member of his party or a member of his family who ends up, the one targeted in all of this, when somebody just says, to hell with it, my life's been ruined for no good reason, and I have nothing left to lose, I might as well take it out on Trump or members of his party or members of his family, for that matter, because the guy ruined my life and I don't care anymore. And, to date, that hasn't happened, but two people decided in about a month apart that maybe they'd give it a shot. I don't know if that was their motivation, but two people have decided it was time to take a shot, literally, at Donald Trump. And it's not that difficult to imagine that someone else, having had their life ruined by Trump's tactics and Trump's supporters, might decide to do just that. Well, anyway, I said that there was something that it reminded me of that would have been happening in Florida. One off on that, but similar, and here's why. The Independent of UK reporting the DeSantis administration threatens local TV stations. Why? For airing abortion rights campaign ads. That seems like an odd thing to be. I mean, I see why they're upset about it, but ordinarily most people think, well, it upsets me, but I just won't vote for the person that is airing them. I don't like that position on the issue, but there's nothing you can do about it. Not Ron DeSantis. He's trying to think of things to do about it. The Florida governor is accused of trying to punish local TV stations for airing ads that support Amendment 4, the big abortion referendum question on the ballot this November. Ron DeSantis' administration has appeared to threaten a local TV station with legal action for airing an abortion rights campaign ad. The ad in question is the same one that aired in Florida during the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. It features a woman named Caroline who needed to have an abortion and cancer treatments after a brain tumor diagnosis in 2022. Such a difficult situation would have been complicated by Florida's 6-week abortion ban today. The doctors knew that if I did not end my pregnancy, I would lose my baby and I would lose my life, and my daughter would lose her mom, the woman says. You see how that would happen, right? She needed to have cancer treatment right away that would have sickened and probably killed the baby anyway, because of the nature of chemotherapy and radiation treatments, etc., that would have been necessary to treat her cancer. And you can't have pregnancy making demands on the body on top of all the demands being made by radiation and chemotherapy, and it probably wasn't going to work out very well anyway, and abortion was the recommendation. But these days you would say, well, sorry, I guess just everybody's just going to have to die in this situation. The doctors knew that if I didn't end my pregnancy, I would lose my baby, lose my life, and my daughter, already born, would lose her mom, the woman says. Florida has now banned abortion, even in cases like mine. Amendment 4 is going to protect women like me. Well, they've sent letters to the TV stations dated October 3rd and sent by the Florida Department of Health. Department of Health, what business would they have in all of this? Shouldn't the Department of Law be handling this? But the Department of Health is the one that could be directed to do this. Presumably, is that department headed by, is it Joseph Ladapo, the wacko Surgeon General? Does he run it, or is it a Secretary of Health that presides? I'm not sure. But at any rate, let's see. But the letter was sent to WFLA TV's Vice President, Mark Higgins, and was shared on social media by journalist Jason Garcia, who accused the administration of trying to intimidate the TV station. the DeSantis administration had previously been accused of using his election office to dragnet to target citizens who signed a petition that successfully put Amendment 4 on November's ballots. So we'll send it to the states. Everybody wanted it sent to the states, Trump said, so that the people in each state could vote on this thing. But as it turns out, Republicans actually wanted to send it to the states so that states could hunt down and punish people who wanted to vote on it. That's what DeSantis is doing. Florida is one of several states with reproductive rights on the ballot this November, and if passed, Amendment 4 would enshrine the right to abortion care in the state's constitution, effectively overturning that 6-week ban, and it would be very effective at overturning that ban, unless, of course, the Supreme Court ruled that it is illegal for state voters to amend their constitutions in ways that they don't like and throw it out instead. Well, we'll have to wait and see whether they ever do that. The department claims the ad is illegal under Section 386.01 of Florida law that allows the state to remove any, quote, nuisance that, quote, threatens or impairs people's health. That's the hook they're using. Sure.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We better get through a couple more things here, or, we'll feel deprived. But yeah, we're in the middle of this reading, this time a report from the UK's Independent, though clearly it's been reported on elsewhere, and they're linking to it. This just happens to be the link I had handy about Ron DeSantis directing his Department of Health to threaten the licensure, I guess, or to threaten with legal action the television stations that dared to run political ads about things that he didn't like. Isn't that amazing? And most political ads will frequently contain information that the other side won't like very much. But we usually just say, well, that's that. You fight against this. The answer to speech you disagree with is more speech. That used to be the Republican solution to everything, and deregulating the speech so that everybody can chime in, even fabulously wealthy foreign billionaires can join the party. No, not true, says Sam Alito, except we're watching it happen in real time. So he's wrong about that one. Oh well. Meanwhile, here in Florida, they're actually, again, threatening the television station, saying that it violates nuisance law to air an advertisement urging people to vote for a constitutional amendment that's on the ballot this November. That's a nuisance now. Wow. I mean, I think Ron DeSantis is a nuisance. They ought to get rid of that guy. And we should threaten the state of Florida with legal action against it for not enforcing its own nuisance law. The advertisement, this letter says, is not only false, it is dangerous. Therefore, a nuisance. I guess the health department said that if the ad is not removed within 24 hours, the department will initiate legal proceedings to obtain an injunction. Will it get that injunction? Probably not, but crazier things have happened. The case will be assigned to Eileen Cannon, and everything will be taken care of. Critics have accused the state government of fascism and trying to silence political rivals. Sure looks like it. Leon County Democrats responded, outrageous bullying using the government, pure fascism. Floridians, this is not democracy, said Nikki Fried, chair of the Florida Democratic Party. We do not live in a free state, free of government interference, free of government intimidation, and free of government overreach. The DeSantis regime is threatening TV stations with prosecution for running ads supporting abortion rights, and Amendment 4 added former state representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, who is running for state senate. Florida is not a free state. And I guess here a clip taken from a screenshot on Twitter from the letter, which basically says what we've read already. They're threatening them with legal action. Lots of citations to the specific parts of the code. Not that it matters, because this code is just not applicable, but there it is. Amendment 4 would codify the right to an abortion at any point before fetal viability and prevent laws in the state from restricting access before that point. It would also prevent laws from interfering with abortions after that point in the pregnancy if necessary to, quote, protect the patient's health. Florida's ban on abortion at roughly 6 weeks of pregnancy, before many women know they are pregnant, is among the most severe anti-abortion laws in the country. It came into effect this past May after the Supreme Court revoked a constitutional right to abortion by overturning Roe v. Wade in 2022. And remember, Donald Trump was very proud of himself for doing that, because it'll be sent back to the states, except that is if the state says, F you, we don't want it. So, Florida's 6-week ban, like its 12-week predecessor, has exceptions, supposedly, for women whose lives are endangered by their pregnancies, but hospitals and medical providers have been hesitant to test such exceptions. That's the real issue. And that's the reason that Florida Republicans stand there and say, well, it's false. You could have, this ban still would have allowed you to get the abortion. Well, it would have, but no provider will do it because they're afraid of being prosecuted. Why are they afraid of being prosecuted? Because the Florida regime prosecutes people or threatens to prosecute them for dumb things at the drop of a hat. They're right now threatening television stations for violating nuisance law by airing a political ad that they more or less are compelled to air if they're paid for it. And the idea of threatening them with prosecution. Gee whiz, why would anybody think that they would be threatened with prosecution for providing an abortion that the law explicitly says they're allowed to provide? And the answer is, well, the law specifically provides that you can air these commercials too, but here's the state threatening to prosecute them nonetheless. So, who could blame them for coming to that conclusion? All right, that's the end of the article. There are others now discussing this. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to discuss it yesterday, because now everybody's discussing it. We could have looked like we were much more on top of things, but it's still news to most people. So we're in time with all that. All right, and I think that covers things we need to go back and cover from yesterday's show that were inadequately discussed or inadequately supported. All I remembered was, didn't we read something about that at some point? And then I went and found those things. Okay. I'll note for the record, many people talking about this one in the Washington Post. Bob Woodward, I guess, has a new book, every 6 weeks or so. He's got a new book telling us, oh my God, I wish we had known that at the time that Bob Woodward knew that, but he needed to write it in a book and get us to pay for it. So thanks for bringing us all that news. Trump, well, here's the headline on this one. I'll just do the headline. I'm sure I'll read the article and maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow. Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Putin during a 2020 shortage. It doesn't actually have an article here. Ironically, because this is an article, it doesn't have an article in the headline. That's the way headlines work. Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Putin during 2020 shortage. New book says. War is the name of the new book. What's it good for? I don't know. Ask Bob Woodward, but I would have to guess absolutely nothing in terms of, it reveals news. The problem is it reveals it when it's olds and of very little use to us. But there is an election coming up. I'm surprised that he was allowed to release this book in advance of an upcoming election for fear that it would influence the outcome. War by Bob Woodward traces how Trump and Biden responded to international crisis and concludes that Trump is worse than Nixon, the president exiled by the Watergate scandal. I'm glad they shoehorned that in there because otherwise you'd have no idea who Bob Woodward was. But, you know, kudos to Bob dining out still on Watergate, which for about 40 years was well deserved. Now, on the other hand, I don't know if you want to rest on those laurels, considering that, we're all sitting here about to elect worse than Nixon. And, but Woodward, though, is interviewing him because it's a source of income, as opposed to getting out there and saying, no, I'm not interviewing him. It'd be like writing about Hitler. I hate that guy, and I want nothing to do with him, and I don't want to promote his name. Why don't I just write a book that says he's worse than Nixon or Hitler, for that matter, because I know that's true. But instead, all right, well, this is Bob Woodward's MO. Anyway, I will read all about that probably after the show, and maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. But I thought that was kind of interesting. How do you remain a competitive candidate for president when you're like the America first? Make America great again, right? Take care of Americans. We're sending all our money to Ukraine. Why aren't we sending it to... This is the new angle on the lies about FEMA's not doing anything about Hurricane Helene. Meanwhile, by the way, you're under hurricane threat again in Florida, and all your resources were sent to North Carolina, by the way. Hopefully they're hurrying to get back because Hurricane Milton is coming to destroy Florida in the next day or two. Historic storm in its own right. Anyway, the new lie about Helene relief is they were sending all our money to Ukraine and they're not sending any to North Carolina. How dare they? Well, as it turns out, America faced a monumental crisis in the face of COVID. Not enough tests. Everybody who wants a test can get a test. That was never true, but that was what Trump was telling people. It was very pointedly not true. People were literally dying for want of tests, but... or I should say literally dying while waiting to find out if they could get a hold of tests. But now we were all having to, there were no tests, right? We had to line up and wait at major public testing centers to get a test. There weren't home tests then, but there were lab tests that you could use. Anyway, apparently there were far fewer of them because he sent them. Donald Trump, in the middle of the COVID crisis of 2020, takes the tests we've got and sends them to Vladimir Putin, for God's sake. How do you run for president after that? And the answer is, LOL, YOLO, nothing matters, I guess. I'll be looking into this. I'll want to read more about this. But not just yet. And I don't know. This will take us forever to get through. And then we won't be able to bring you some of the other things we've been holding on to. But maybe we can turn around and do this afterwards, because this one's not very long. Rosalyn MacGregor, I mentioned earlier, has, in connection with the question of how many amendments are there to the United States Constitution. Now, you may think you know the answer to that, and you might even be right. And you might think you know the answer to it, and you'd be wrong, but you would be justifiably wrong, because let's say you opened your Trump Bible for the answer to that. The Trump Bible is already not true. So there you go. If you open your Trump Bible to find out how many amendments there are to the Constitution, well, you wouldn't know, because they stopped after number 10. But if you had another copy of the Constitution, you would think that perhaps there were 27 amendments to the Constitution, counting the latest one, which they started ratifying in the 1700s and finally got around to ratifying in 92. By the way, last state to ratify the 27th Amendment, or the one to put it over the top, Michigan. So congratulations to Michigan. And Michigan wrapped up in another wacky constitutional mystery. Why aren't there 28 amendments to the Constitution? And Rosalyn is here to tell you there are. But Trump, as with most things, simply lied and said there wasn't. So there you go. We joke sometimes about Trump just eliminating things from the Constitution that he doesn't like and doesn't agree with, except, as it turns out, it's a reality. This is something you could never get away with this. Certainly he'd be called out on his bald-faced lies if he just said there was a different number of constitutional amendments than there really were. Well, he has done that, and here is Rosalyn to explain it to you. In case you just, well, what? Why haven't we heard anything about that? Well, because I haven't pressed play yet. That's why.
Good morning, morning, David.
Good morning.
It was a great pleasure to meet you at a diner in Frederick, Maryland recently.
It was.
It was too bad that we didn't have time to be journalists and survey everyone to find out their thoughts on the coming election.
By the way, we got thoughts on the coming election obliquely from the wait staff there. But yes, it was a great pleasure to meet you there, whether I had been in Frederick or anywhere. Let me get out of your way, please.
I came to Washington, D.C., and specifically the White House, to protest in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm sure most of your audience know that the Equal Rights Amendment was big news in the 1970s and 80s, but they may not know the details about why it's not already the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. People may remember the name Alice Paul and her struggle in support of U.S. women's right to vote. After the 19th Amendment was codified into law, she realized that women still didn't have equality under the Constitution. She created the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923, and it was first introduced to Congress in 1924. The amendment simply states, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The ERA picked up steam during the women's movement of the 1970s, and I was 9 years old when Michigan passed it in 1972. I watched with dismay as the effort fizzled in the 1980s because of the deadline placed into the preamble of the amendment. Then, the Congressional Compensation Act of 1789 was ratified as the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. That meant there was no actual deadline on ratification. Support was rallied, and the final 3 states needed passed the Equal Rights Amendment, with Virginia being the last in January 2020. Unfortunately, this was during the Trump administration, and then Attorney General Bill Barr instructed the National Archivist not to publish the 28th Amendment, which is the last step in making it official. The Equal Rights Amendment has been in limbo ever since. Recently, the American Bar Association dedicated time and scholarship to look at the issues holding up the Equal Rights Amendment and issued a statement that the ERA is already law of the land. The publishing by the National Archivist is an administrative step, and the Equal Rights Amendment stands as ratified. The U.S. Constitution does not have any statement about time limits in preambles, nor is there any support in U.S. law for a state to withdraw its amendment support once it has been passed. The Project Sentinel effort was to stand, as the suffragists did in front of Woodrow Wilson's White House, but this time in support of the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. A group of women from around the country gathered with signs to ask President Joe Biden to instruct the National Archivist to publish the ERA as the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. If listeners would like to join in the push, feel free to text the President's office at area code 302-404-0880. I know I do daily. Or sign the petition at sign4era.org. That's sign, S-I-G-N, the number 4, and the letters ERA.org. Do your part to make this a more perfect union. Back to you, David.
Okay, thanks, Rosalyn. And yes, it was a great pleasure to meet you on your way in. It was a great effort that you were a part of. And this is a weird and complicated story. And interesting, but again, it does raise the possibility of things we've joked about before. Like if you amended the Constitution, and what if, the requisite number of states ratified an amendment to the Constitution, and there was this last administrative step, just as the Trump administration contemplated, what if the Electoral College voted for Biden, but we just instructed Mike Pence, and he listened to us, to say that they didn't elect Joe Biden, that they had elected Donald Trump, or even just to say they didn't elect anybody and we're going to have a vote in the House of Representatives to elect a president, or send them back to the states so that the states can send you back certification that they did, in fact, vote for Donald Trump, whatever it is. What if we just did that? right? And the answer is, I guess, under normal circumstances, you would then, I don't know, I guess you'd end up in court and the Supreme Court would have to rule on it. And I guess nobody worried about these things beforehand because they said, well, of course the Supreme Court isn't going to stand there and say, an alien from outer space won the presidential election. Or they're not going to just rule in the face of fact that somebody else is president of the United States. And then, of course, they did that in 2000. And then, so why were we caught by surprise by this effort in 2020? Well, we really weren't. This was war gamed ahead of time, and people who, actually consider wild scenarios like that said, yeah, he could absolutely try and do that. Well, what if the Constitution was amended, but the president ordered the archives, for instance, or the Attorney General ordered the archives not to publish it? The last thing you do how do you make an amendment to the Constitution effective? Well, the Congress has to vote on it, and if each house adopts the resolution in support of sending it to the states for ratification, then the requisite number of states ratify it, then it's part of the Constitution, and the archivist has to publish it because it's the archivist that's in charge of safekeeping of and, I guess accurate publication, ensuring accurate publication of the Constitution. Because I think it doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that the American people have the right to read the Constitution, but presumably even this Supreme Court right now at this point would say, all right, yeah, that's actually something that the American people have the right to know, what's in the Constitution and what's not. Except at the moment, I haven't been asked about this, but I'm not sure how they would rule on whether or not the people of the United States have the right to read the entirety of the Constitution, including the 28th Amendment. And that would be because they would say, well, there is no 28th Amendment. How can we say that? Well, several reasons. The simplest of which is, well, it hasn't been published by the archivist, so therefore. Right? Now, it's not quite as simple as all that. There is this weird mess of the preamble to not the Constitution itself, but the preamble to the proposed 28th Amendment included this weird timeline. And so the question is, does the Congress have the right to attach a timeline to a proposed amendment? And it's not clear that they do, and it's not clear that they don't, but there have been amendments sent to the states for ratification that didn't include a timeline. The 27th Amendment, as Rosalyn mentioned, and it was just fine. There's nothing that requires the expiration after a certain amount of time of a proposed amendment. But then again, there was no preamble to the 27th Amendment, and so there was nothing to point to. And there was a preamble to the proposed 28th Amendment. So the question is, does the preamble mean anything or not? Now, I presume that this Supreme Court would hang their hat on that and say, yes, preambles mean something. Congress can have that intent and impose it. But I don't know why it has that power. I don't know what public good is served by time limiting anything. But presumably they would say, at the minimum, if they were totally puzzled by it, they would just say, well, separation of powers requires that we stay out of their way for this one. They have the prerogative to attach a time limit, and we have no, it might serve no purpose, but I don't know if we have to find a purpose in order to find it valid. That's problematic. More interesting is that the American Bar Association says this thing is valid, a valid part of the Constitution. It's the 28th Amendment, and we should act as though it is the case, because it is the case, and whether we'll see any litigation. I assume they'd follow that up with litigation first chance they get and force the Supreme Court to rule on whether or not this thing has been ratified or not, and how important is publication orders. And by the way, I guess this is an interesting question too, right? If you're just saying, well, the preamble precludes it from being considered a part of the 28th Amendment, or a part of the Constitution to be ratified as the 28th Amendment. And if that's the case, then why the order from Bill Barr not to publish it? You would be useless. No reason to issue that order unless you think it's actually a valid part of the Constitution, in which case, what are you doing standing in the way of its publication? It's a very interesting and weird and complicated thing, an amazing can of worms, and I thank Rosalyn for bringing it to our attention. I think we've probably discussed it at some point, the preamble part, but I think the orders to not publish are particularly interesting and worth lingering over. And, it could just as well be the case. A different Supreme Court would probably take this opportunity to say, a time limit imposed in the preamble. The preamble isn't the text. It doesn't do anything. There aren't any binding requirements in it, just as there's nothing binding about the preamble to the Constitution. That doesn't stop people from thinking it's the case and applying it in weird ways. Well, we the people say X, Y, Z, and as it says in the preamble, we the people. So therefore it must be something important. And the people, this, that, and the other thing, and we have rights, and most of my rights involve violating the rights of others. But I'm a people, and we're the we, and everybody needs to shut up now. Or people point to the Declaration of Independence. What about my right to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Interesting. Good phrasing. Nice thought. Declaration of Independence, not binding law. So it's just not a thing. What about the preamble to the Constitution? Same thing, generally speaking, the Supreme Court has said. Unless this Supreme Court needed it for something, in which case, poof. It's now binding law after all. But ordinarily, preambles aren't binding law, so the time limit shouldn't be binding law. In addition to which, if you conduct any kind of analysis for the need for such a time limit or there being some public good that comes from it, there isn't any. I mean, they could create some, I'm sure. But essentially, the grounds are there, and even if the grounds weren't there, the Supreme Court would just say, well, look, the fact is that 6 of us say, go to hell. It's not part of the Constitution. So it's not. I mean, could 6 of them say, hey, the 27th Amendment isn't part of the Constitution. The 13th Amendment isn't part of the Constitution. The 14th Amendment isn't part of the Constitution. 14th Amendment, Section 3, anyway, they just did that too. Maybe not. Might not be a thing anymore. And where do you appeal to? Nowhere. Because the Constitution, which they just invalidated part of, says that they are the Supreme Court, and what they say goes, and there's no appeal from that. But what if that wasn't part of the Constitution? Well, if that wasn't, well, who would say that it wasn't? The Supreme Court would say it. But the Supreme Court can't say it because they're erasing it. Well, we say it first and then we erase it. I don't know. They can do what they like, I guess, until we change things. So I just thought that was very interesting. And thank you, Rosalyn, for contributing that report. I've got more, and we really need to work into the show in the next couple of days all of the other contributions. As I mentioned, I think I'm still sitting on a contribution from Steve Sittig and also Seth Chipman, who has an interesting 2-parter on a wild controversy in water rights in California that should be on the record because we have an expansive view of what's important in politics in this country. And we want to incorporate that, but we're almost out of time. So, before handing things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and telling you what's going to be on there, maybe a quick look around just to see if, one, is there anything else that I was absolutely determined to bring to your attention? Or do I run back to the Bob Woodward book and worry about that one? I don't know. Well, anyway, how about this one? I'll save this part for tomorrow. Instead of doing the Bob Woodward thing, which we'll also save for tomorrow, because that's something that probably really needs to be combed through. Another look, another angle provided by Mark Joseph Stern, to whom we turn for a lot of things like this in Slate magazine, on that DeSantis administration threat to prosecute the media for airing pro-choice ads. A little legal analysis on that, if I might, just before we exit. You know the background of it. DeSantis and his allies already spending large sums of taxpayer dollars, though, to fight Amendment 4, which would enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution, using state resources for that. Probably a no-no, but not in DeSantis world. His election police have been interrogating and intimidating residents who signed petitions to put it on the ballot already. His administration created a publicly funded state-run website condemning the amendment and has run ads, which he says is illegal for the other side to do, promoting the current law, which bans abortions after 6 weeks. Why is that not a nuisance? Because he likes it. So now he's sent this letter for the TV station to pull the ads. The advertisement in question we talked about, called Caroline, and outlining this one woman's situation. In its letter raising the threat of criminal charges, the Department of Health protested that the ad contained false statements. Specifically, the department cited an exception to the ban that permits abortions when necessary to save the patient's life. But the problem is that most doctors are afraid to rely on that because this administration in Florida is a little bit crazy about what the law says and means, and might just say, to hell with it, we're going to prosecute you anyway. So, anyway, I didn't get to bring you very much of any of Mark Joseph Stern's analysis about it. I don't know. I guess really there was never going to be any time for that, not with as little time as we had left on the clock. But we'll save that one for tomorrow and add it to our roundup of crazy stuff happening in Florida, and but we'll have to do so tomorrow. Okay, all right. I thought we might get to some of the legal analysis, but he spent so much time setting it up, and I had to skim through that as I'm speaking before we could get to the good stuff at the end, but I guess we'll get to it tomorrow. How about instead we allow Justice Putnam to get to the good stuff at the end of this show, i.e. the beginning of his show, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what he's got on tap for you today. Let's see. The Supreme Court, right back on top of things, issued some rare bad news for Trump and Elon Musk. I had that story sitting and waiting. I'm glad he'll cover it for you instead. Then on the rest of the menu, Oregon's governor called for the DMV to pause automatic voter registration as the number of people mistakenly added to the voter rolls grows. All right. Sounds like, I guess they're on top of it. MAGA Republicans are targeting $3 billion in federal contracts. After the Deloitte consultant disclosed messages with J.D. Vance that were unconnected to his work. And for the first time in more than a century, salmon are swimming freely in the Klamath, I don't know, in the river and its tributaries. He knows. He'll tell you the right pronunciation. This just days after the largest dam removal project in U.S. history was completed. That was the largest dam project I ever heard of.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning.
You knew I was going to do it.
David Waldman.
International news at the end of this update. Let's see. Mayor of the state capital of Guerrero in Mexico killed less than a week after he took office. Yikes. And a self-described Nazi, also yikes, became the first person convicted in the Australian state of Victoria for performing the outlawed Nazi salute. They know how to do it there. We'll be back tomorrow.